I said I would never play this game again, and I'm not. This is creative mode. It's Bedrock edition or Windows 10 edition, same thing. I just wanted to do some experiments, and I had a few things I wanted to test out. Just kind of mess around with the game. I never actually tried creative mode, so at this point, I had already teleported myself a million blocks out. Then I went to 30 million. So this is 30 million blocks out, which is like the old standard, I guess, like world border. I've seen like 1 million, 10 million, and 30 million used before as world borders, but Bedrock Edition is also supposed to be like infinite, like you're supposed to be able to just keep going forever. I don't know if that's like a setting that you have to like enable that I didn't or whatever, but I mean, it's, if this is past the edge of the world, it makes sense that it would be behaving this way, because if you went teleported past the world border and you weren't like actually supposed to ever be here, because this world was limited to like, which I end up going back to try to figure out, it's about 16.5 million before this spacing went back to normal between blocks. Almost 15 million blocks in either direction past where the blocks stopped being like this. So originally I thought it was all messed up, like everything wasn't gonna function, at all or whatever, but I started to notice things like, I could still remove the blocks, I could still go, it makes it difficult to move diagonally, but you can still go like, perpendicular, like on the edge of the, like straight, through the edge, perpendicular on the squares, and it will allow you to move with God mode. And then if you try to fly like this, like it'll kind of let you move diagonally, but it's like kind of choppy, I would describe it as. But you can still move side to side. It just moves in more of a zigzagging pattern instead of like the fluid pattern that you'd be used to on like the normal world. So the more I like looked at the stuff, I realized that like, it's the exact same thing that would generate, except you have this space in between. So like if you conceptualize this as like physical matter in real life, for example, like this space could be like the space where the data that is stored for that matter, right? So like when it all comes together, like something like even like with the trees, it's like when you look at it from the right angle, it's all there, right? And the spaces are only noticeable because you're used to seeing it the other way. Like basically is what it comes down to. It's like I noticed instantly when I teleported to 30 million, because it doesn't normally look like that, right? But essentially what this is telling me is like this is what it looks like to the game before it does something else, right? Or some interim step, or something else is happening that's preventing you from seeing them all close together. So then once I figured out that you could like physically fly through the physical blocks, like they didn't stop me at this point, then I started experimenting with like how fast could I go, what kind of surfaces could I move through, like other than just like the normal flight that you toggle between the elytra, and then like the creative mode, like flying, like God mode flying, like I could actually fly with the elytra through physical blocks, and it's not like that normally. So teleporting out 30 million blocks to get this configuration of the blocks with the space between them is what allowed all this other stuff to happen, or facilitated it in the way in which it happens for the rest of what's documented here. Like all the things that I tested, or because even when I went back to the teleported back towards the center of the, where the world spawn is, like closer to 15 million blocks, it's like 16.5 million or less, then I could do the same things as out here with it spaced and fly through physical blocks, even though the whole world was physically put together like how you're typically used to seeing it when you spawn in. So something about like teleporting beyond the world border or beyond what was generated, etc., like to get it to be like this is what allowed the interaction with all the other things after going back, right? Because before I was hitting the surfaces and hitting the blocks and like normal, just with flying, and then I could switch to like levitating, right? But I still, as I went down into that cave, like hit the walls and landed on my feet and then teleported away. So it wasn't until moving past this threshold of 16.5 million on this world where it looks like this, and then the functionality of how you interact with the world changes, how it behaves completely. So at this point, I don't know how far back towards world spawn I have to go to see it any change or anything. So I just went back to 27 million by 27 million, and it's still like this. So that just made me start to wonder, like, okay, there's like millions and millions and millions of blocks of it just like this. Like, is it like this because I teleported past, or does this gen that I used in this current version of Bedrock, like, literally just hard, hard pass out at 16.5 million to where it's looking like that? So this is at 10 million. So I've gone to 10 million, and I'm like, okay, 10 million. We're back to like, this is what, normal world generation looks like, and I'm just flying around looking at, okay, not really thinking much other than like, all right, now I know like it's between these two places, right? So I'll just keep trying to triangulate like how far before the terrain starts to change and the world is completely different. So that's what I was trying to do. But also I could tell that just by what I had done, like, things were running differently. Not just like, you know what I mean? Like, things loading in and generate. It's just like there's something in the world had changed. Like, it just became like permanently choppy. Like, it was letting me fly in the normal paths, but it still wanted me to be flying on the diagonal path that was like the open, you know what I mean? And I don't even think at this point I had realized I could fly through solid surfaces till like about now. And I was like, wait a second, I can fly through? And then I started thinking about like, all right, what else can I test? So I first just wanted to find out, where is this like actual kind of border, or where does this start changing, where it spaces out the actual blocks and generates differently by these different rules or different set of circumstances. So 15 mil in each direction, looking out, trying to find any kind of sign that this could be turning into the other terrain, the other world. Go to 20 mil. Still that way. So we know 15 mil it looks normal, 20 mil it looks like this. So we just gotta hone it in, right? But it's interesting that when you're in the water, so if you're in one of these blocks, like, there's all the space between it, but you're in a water block, like a source block or whatever we want to call it, the water block, and when you're in the block and you go below, that water block runs down below you, so everything in front of you looks like you're in the water and that you're surrounded by water. It's only when you're outside of it does it not look like you're fully submerged. Like once you're underneath, it looks like it's like the whole ocean, right? But in reality, then you see the top and it's just the, you know, these like tiny little spikes of water source blocks. But when you're inside of it, it just looks like the whole ocean's there, even when it's spread out like this. It's pretty remarkable because I didn't really like test it with lava, I guess, but I just don't see it being the same because you can't see through it, right? So it creates like an illusion of completion that you couldn't get otherwise. When you're super high up in the air, it's kind of hard to see this. When you're just over the ocean, you got to come down quite a bit to even realize which world you're in, like if the blocks are spread out or not. Like if there's mountains and stuff, you probably see it sooner, but when you just spawn over the ocean like this, it's kind of hard to tell at some points. You gotta like fly all the way down and be like, oh, there we go. So once you make the trip down, find out at 17 million, still looks like this. So we're really close. Between 16 and 17 million, we know that it turns from the normal world generation you'd see to the one that showed itself or revealed itself, or whatever I'm gonna say, was there, manifested at 30 million blocks. I don't know really how the border would look, but it was more just to find out where does it like physically actually change. Like, so inside of this coordinates, it's gonna look like this, and then beyond that, it looks like this. Something remarkable and just kind of beautiful about seeing how things look just in their like individual constituent parts, the blocks, because it's not just one block, right? It's like the pillar of that block and everything is there, how it looks physically just with the space in between. So it's really completely different even though it's the same. It's pretty remarkable. I've never seen anything like that in this game, and I've never played with creative mode, but I'm glad that I did because it's pretty interesting. So at 16.7 million, it's normal. We know that between 16.9 and 16.7, it turns from the normal world generation with the blocks touching to the pillars with the space in between them. For this world gen, at least. So now I'm just trying to see what exactly happens. Like, can we fly so fast that it can't generate? Like, is it going to turn into the spread out terrain? And then also, what are the limitations with the... It's interesting that you can fly through the physical blocks of any type. Trees, leaves, rocks, like ore, any blocks, but the water will stop you. I thought that was interesting. I mean, it makes sense because it's like flowing, you know, the source blocks, but I mean, normally you can't go through mountains by just flying through them, so I thought it was interesting that that would stop you still. Started to realize that nothing could really stop me. I could fly through all the physical blocks, and as long as I stayed out of the water, I could just keep moving. And then I realized that when I was physically in a block, I could just hold down the button for the fireworks and use more of them faster and accelerate more. So actually, by having this ability and being physically in the blocks, you actually fly faster than in the open air, because there's like a cooldown on the animation if you're not physically in a block, and this just makes it so you can just hold it forever. See, when you're in the block, you can just spam the firework, just one after the other, and it just keeps spamming it. Then when you're outside, there's a little delay, like you know. So it's like you can't even keep your speed as much when you're in the open air because of the, I don't know if you want to call it an animation glitch or whatever you want to recognize, is letting you infinitely spam the fireworks faster when you're inside of a physical block. It's interesting because it's counterintuitive to like normal movement throughout the normal rendered world you'd see, right? You wouldn't be able to fly through any physical blocks, and it's obviously much faster to go through the air, but this rendering of the world in that at least one sense is the opposite. You actually have more freedom and speed to accelerate through physical blocks than you do the actual open air where you're meant to be flying. So that in itself is kind of like a, you know, uniquely identifiable characteristic between these two renderings and representations of the physical world. So what I was trying to do is get exactly in sync with the bottom of the bedrock so that I could just spam it to keep that speed of flying through a physical object, but also steady myself so that I could still see the direction you're heading instead of just the inside of the block, you know. But it's really hard because even when you're constantly spamming the fireworks and you have that much forward momentum, it'll just stop you. And then sometimes like it would just stop like that randomly, like just randomly you just lose all momentum, like as if you hit a water block, but you're beneath the bedrock, but beneath the whole world. So it's like I don't know exactly what caused that, when that would happen. But I knew that if I could just get it to balance right, you'd be able to go pretty quick continually. It's just hard to get it that exact balance. So a lot of things became more clear, you know, more testing around, more teleporting, seeing all this stuff. But as soon as certain things came into picture, other things just left more questions and more things that wanted to be answered. And then that's when I just tried steadying it so that I was perfectly aimed to the center of the block and then never lost any height. And I just experimented with that more and more. The more that I flew, I started to notice that only certain types of blocks or you know, closely rendered caves and stuff would even show up. So when you're below the bedrock, your sense of the height of the world is essentially non-existent, not just because you're below, but because it's not rendering normally, right? You can't see what leads all the way up to the top or even what's in between the blocks. It's just like, it looks like mostly empty space, when in reality, like, put all these blocks together and it just looks like the normal world again. It's quite interesting. Go ahead and teleport back to where we expect to see more normal terrain, like the normal world generation that you would see. So inside of 16.7 million blocks in either direction from spawn, you have these normal placements of the terrain and the blocks without the spaces in between. But the way in which I was able to navigate them was still relatively unrestricted, I would say, you know, being able to just fly through the trees and the mountains, every physical block. It's like completely different experience, not just because it's creative mode, but because going to past that rendered world to where it looks like that and then coming back with being able to navigate your movement in ways that you could in the other world, that's what allowed a lot of this to be happening, right? So it's the fact that those rules or that behavior of interacting with the blocks or not interacting with the blocks carried over from teleporting past to like 30 million blocks and then coming back. So it's really interesting to like teleport to another spot at 16 million or wherever blocks and then have the world generate all these chunks that have never existed before, but then you can interact with them and see them in a way that you wouldn't have been able to at all ever if it hasn't been for this glitch or change or whatever different interpretation of function that happens so far out past a supposed world border, you know. So having to go like diagonally and seeing that choppiness is exactly what I'm talking about. Then you go straight and you don't fight against that diagonal and just go one direction with the squares and instead of through the corners of the squares, and you go like exponentially faster. You can still just go just as fast and go through every physical object, except for you just have so much more speed when you stay in that line or one of those lines. And that diagonal is just so choppy. It's really interesting because even though you're back into this rendered part of the world where there's no spacing between the blocks, it's still fundamentally changed how you're interacting with this entire world. as I started flying more underneath the bedrock in the normal rendered world without the spaces, I realized that because it's the exact same pattern on every piece of bedrock and it's just repeating, that it doesn't look like you're moving. And I kept having to look at the coordinates in the top left corner to see like that I was actually moving forward or not. But when the things have the space in between and you can see up and see stuff as it passes, it's really obvious how fast you're moving and what your relative speed is to the rest of the environment. But when you're below in this state and you're just seeing that bedrock layer just moving by, it looks like completely still. Like it's not even moving at all, no matter how fast you go. It's pretty interesting. It's like an obvious thing that once observed really sets in how impactful that is. So this went on for several minutes and I was able to hold it still, but I'll just condense that for time's sake here. I knew of the existence of these types of canyons or holes, but I didn't realize like how prevalent they were, and especially the further out you go. So being this many millions of blocks out, like these are a lot more common. So in version 1.18 and beyond, sometimes, or a lot of times, instead of a mountain generating, a giant hole is just there. And that's what you're seeing here. So after this, I was just thought it was super cool, so I kept looking for more of them. I was like, dang, I want to see some more of these, so that's what I did. But first I had to just marvel at how this one that I randomly ran into, right at the edge of where everything turns to that spaced out placement of the blocks. This is right towards the border of where the world changes, which is just interesting. So after I had seen this abyss, absence of the mountaintop, I wanted to see what some other ones looked like. I hadn't really ever investigated these, so I had no idea how massive they could be. That first one felt absolutely massive when I flew into it by accident, and I wasn't really sure how much larger the other ones could get, but this one was pretty eye-opening just to see the massive expanse of mountain face that's completely absent from this whole region. It's fascinating. Also, just one more interesting observation that I noted is that, from my understanding, what I've been told by more experienced players than me, is that this biome is pretty rare, especially if it has the mushrooms in it, the cows, and that just happens to be right at the border going to the, it's just a coincidence, I guess, you could look at it that way, but it's interesting that this is right at the border of where you go into the different types of world generation, past that proposed world border where everything, was rendered and fathomed differently that brought this behavior to here. So just by way of looking for these mountains, I found this rare biome too that just happened to be by the other mountains and everything else that was around right by the edge of the world. The distribution is going to be even throughout the world, but it is interesting that there's so many landmarks like right at the edge of the generation of the physical world and its normal form or perceived form. I mean, you could find those anywhere, but this was specifically about going past the border and what that does to your world, what that does to the game, and your interactions with it.